So, this morning's plenary speaker is Mary Jane Stannus, and we are very fortunate to have Mary Jane with us today. Many of you will have heard Mary Jane speak at various times, and she is always insightful. Mary Jane is Head of Content Services at the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, initially taking up the role of Manager Television Archives in 1996. As my children would say, in the last millennium, Mum. Since then, the role has grown to incorporate management of ABC's wider archives, its libraries, and its rights management and records management services. In 2008, Mary Jane headed up a major project to digitise the archive, which has been just a boon for the world. In 2016, she's working with her team to build on that work, update digital archive systems to enable further digitisation of ABC content and to address the information management challenges of a national broadcaster in a transforming media and information environment. Mary Jane previously worked in information management roles in several different organisations, including Standards Australia and the New South Wales Education Department. Her current role presents new experiences, new learnings, and new information management dilemmas on a constant basis, which she grasps with both hands. So welcome, Mary Jane.
Good morning. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay my respects to the elders, both past and present. It is a real pleasure for me to be addressing you at this 2017 Information Online Conference. The conference program itself is an impressive representation of digital experimentation, projects, conceptual thinking that information professionals have worked through over recent years. I was going to say that it was not so long ago, but actually it is quite some time ago, that as part of my librarianship training, we explored the wonders of quick and quack indexing. Now, if you don't know what that is, do not worry. But it did occur sometime after IBM was pushing rods through punch cards in the early days of data processing. So today's conference program offers numerous examples of the evolution of data processing, indexing, the use of linked data and data sharing, dramatic developments in managing and using information. But there are further moves that we need to make. So information management in the broadcasting environment has always been a challenge. As broadcasting itself changes and evolves, managing the media and information that is processed on a daily basis becomes increasingly more complex. Now I get to play with the technology. Do I remember my instructions? Yes. Okay, good. So just an overview of some of the things I'll talk about this morning, and I will just put my watch up here to make sure I don't get too excited on some pages. Okay, so we'll just talk a little bit about the context that I work in, so a little bit about the ABC, a bit about our department, and I've noticed that there's a few people from our department here today, so I hope you can make contact with some of them if you've got questions about what we do at the ABC and want a bit more information. We're going to talk about the special challenges for information management, particularly in a broadcaster. Look at things that we could do to improve performance. So a couple of concepts, datification, master data, metadata. What are we doing about those? And then also talk about the role of the information professional and the others that we work with in this field. So I suspect that parallels can easily be drawn with other organizations and special industries that many of you are probably working in. So I am talking about a broadcaster, but I think that you'll recognize the issues are common to other organizations. Particularly the larger the organization, probably the more some of these challenges will ring true. So, okay, ABC context. Well, I think you're all pretty familiar with the ABC. and probably dabble in various parts of it. I'm not sure whether you're watching TV, listening to radio, getting your news feeds on your telephone. But here we have the ABC services at a glance, and you can see we cover a lot of services. There's online, abc.net.au, there's iView, there are apps for smartphones and tablets, ABC News and Current Affairs Online, there's Radio National, News Radio, Classic FM, Triple J, 56 local radio stations around the country, digital radio, Double J, ABC Jazz, ABC Grandstand, etc. There's streaming. All digital radio services are streamed online. Television, when I started, there was just one channel. That's all I had to look after. It was bliss. But now we have ABC TV, ABC 2, we've got ABC Me, ABC News 24, and catch-up TV on iView. So there are a lot of platforms now and a lot of content being generated for those platforms. We also have the commercial division where content is made available to other organizations. People can purchase things from our library sales area. And there's also the international division. So a lot of things happening there, a lot of content being generated, and of course they all require different formats and special requirements for actually getting that content onto that platform. So we'll come back a little bit later and look at this slide as well. But moving on, I thought I'd just talk a little bit about the ABC in terms of what our audiences are doing. And Michelle Guthrie presented a paper at a recent conference at the University of Melbourne, the New News Conference at the Centre for Advancing Journalism. And she highlighted some of the changes that I thought were quite interesting for us to talk about here today. So just looking at audiences, you can see that since 2014, there's been a 49% increase in ABC News and Current Affairs monthly plays on iView. There's been a 51% increase in ABC News monthly plays on the ABC YouTube channel. So ABC is going social media. Audiences are also increasingly consuming news content on their mobile. So in 2016, over half of all Australians use their mobile phones to access news each week, while desktop news browsing has actually flatlined. 52% of Australians use social media to find, watch, read, share, or comment on news each week. 45% use Facebook to access news. And in 2016, more than 1 in 4 of 18 to 24-year-olds cite social media as their main source of news. So it's a very different shift from the nation sitting down to watch the 7 o'clock news bulletin every night to get their news feed. So it's interesting how audiences are changing. Of course, these are just examples from news and current affairs. We could cite other examples, but I think it gives an indication of the shift. So using social platforms will help us engage increasing parts of the audience who may not usually watch or listen to broadcast media. ABC content needs to appear on their social media platforms. Yes, let me see here. I was just going to say, So just a couple of other things I was going to talk about that Michelle Guthrie has. Actually, I'll just skip to the next slide. Just keep on track. I told you this is what happened, Roxanne. Got to keep an eye on me. We'll talk about the ABC strategy, just to get that broad picture of what the ABC is doing. We have a mission, of course, to be the independent home of Australian conversations, culture, and stories. We'll deliver outstanding content and services that are indispensable to society in a transforming media environment. So one of our missions is we really have to deal with this changing media landscape. There are 3 key pillars that underpin the mission and the vision. Which we've outlined here. So efficiency, being agile, and being accountable, of course, are really important. Efficiency, we need to make sure that the vast majority of the limited funds that we've got have got to go into content for audiences. We need to be agile. We need to be able to change with the changes in technology. And of course, as a public broadcaster, we need to be accountable. Audiences at the center is the ongoing mission at the ABC. Audiences come first. We want to know more about our audiences. We want to know what their habits are, what they want. And it's interesting, actually, how data is a really important means of getting that information. And of course, we need to be creative and engaged. And each one of those pillars has got implications for information management. So efficient and accountable, efficient operation and maximizing investment in content for audiences wherever possible. We clearly need to focus on improving media information management, as it's a critical part of that strategy. Audience in the center, delivering distinctive and quality content that finds its way to all Australians. Enhancing the audience experience of the ABC will require better access to our media assets via the variety of devices that we're using, and this requires our information handling to allow for effective searching. Creative and engaged, commitment to creative excellence, innovative, sharing information, looking for new and smarter ways to do things. Clearly, better information sharing requires better ways of handling information and media. So over recent months, Michelle Guthrie, our managing director, and the ABC executive have been further defining the focus, particularly in response to the rapidly changing digital media landscape. Audience at the center means that ABC content needs to be where the audience is. In an address to the New News Conference at the Centre for Advancing Journalism at University of Melbourne, Michelle talked about the need for dexterity, collaboration, and diversity, and discussed what she referred to as equal digital life. Digital is embedded in the ABC Charter, and the public expects the national broadcaster to use its ingenuity to find new ways to make its content available to audience. It has done so from its origins in the 1930s and will continue to do so. Michelle also spoke about how the ABC is tasking its news staff, for example, to imagine how they could better serve audience if every significant piece of journalism had an equal digital life. So not just digital first, equal digital life, which imposes such questions as, how can we ensure our stories have the same value to our digital audience as to our TV and radio audience? How do we ensure that a terrific piece of journalism on Four Corners, watched by 1 million people on Monday night, will also appeal to an online audience who don't regularly watch the ABC? These same questions are being posed to each of the content areas, not just news. At the beginning of any production, the question to be asked are, how will we ensure that this story is watched, listened to by large television and/or radio audiences, but also gathers a new audience on digital platforms? How do we produce this story with content with equal value to digital audiences? So with audience and quality content for diverse audiences at the center, efficient, agile, and accountable are cornerstones to ensuring that ABC funds can be optimized for content, and that we are the kind of organization that can respond to technology changes and also audience viewing practices as they change. So that's the ABC, and Content Services is the department that I head up. So just a little bit about that. I've just highlighted some of the key service areas that we provide within the ABC. We manage the ABC's archive collection and the ABC's commercial music collections, along with the associated services for access. We have a team of archives researchers who work with programs to find the footage required for their programs, whether it's from our collections or external collections. They're often closely involved in the production processes, making suggestions about material and story angles that would enhance the program. We have a rights team advising on how best to make use of the rights we hold and how and when to clear material for use. The rights team also ensures we have a complete set of contracts and rights information related to the ABC content that we hold so that we can access that information when content is needed. We also provide records management services and advice to the business on how to manage the information. We have a small group of experts, I think, who can provide data modeling advice to the ABC and advice on industry standard metadata and vocabularies. So our largest client division is news, and I have a clip that gives you a bit of the look and feel of working in a news library. So I'll just put that up now.
Hi, I'm Ben Kask. I'm one of the researchers working here in the Sydney News Library. The ABC has a news library in each capital city, and our job is to find library material for news and current affairs programmes, and to identify new material that we can archive and catalogue for later use.
News Library, Natasha speaking.
We are on deck here in Sydney from 8 AM Monday to Friday and from 10:30 at weekends. Each day we archive the previous day's broadcasts and cut stories, and we look through camera material to select anything that might have value for use in future stories. Requests for archive footage can begin from the moment we walk in the door and continue until 10:30 at night. Okay, and that was in 1973. Right, let's see what we've got. We search a number of databases that cover a unique and extensive collection. In addition to digital news content collected from 2009 onwards, we have access to an archive across multiple videotape and film formats that date back to the start of ABC TV in 1956.
This van is the nerve center of our program. Through it lead the camera tables, and from it comes the signal that's directed up to the top of this building to the microwave link on the roof.
We ingest material from tape into the Aurora news production system so that it can be edited into news and current affairs stories.
A murder case that's baffled police for more than 40 years has taken a dramatic turn with a man arrested.
News libraries around the country operate in a similar way. It's a busy job. The Sydney News Library alone receives over 900 requests a month, and often those requests mount as broadcast deadlines near, which means we have to find footage fast or time.
So that's the day in the library, and I think Natasha is here today. There she is. So she can give you a lot more behind the scenes, real information about what goes on. How do those clips get on the screens? I should have actually asked her to dig out some of the Hilton bombing material, which would have been nice for today, wouldn't it? Oh dear, oh, it was probably on television last night. Okay, so interesting little clip. Did you see tapes on shelves? And do you think you also saw a blue screen? True, you did. Although we've digitized most of our 1-inch videotape, there are still a large number of physical formats in the collection. Our digital material is in a digital archive system, or our digitized material is in a digital archive system that was set up nearly 10 years ago now, becoming increasingly difficult to maintain and requiring much more up-to-date structures to support the content management, search, and retrieval that's currently required. We do work with multiple systems. You saw an old blue screen system. You saw the very new, or relatively new newsroom system that's all digital images and hooks up with the scripts and everything else. That just kind of skims the surface of the systems that we use in content services. We have multiple systems, different information stored in different systems for different purposes. So often finding that information can be a bit time consuming because you have to go to a number of different sources. Oh. More collections. Okay, so we do have, however, currently underway a project that we've called the Digital Capability for ABC Archives that will provide the needed upgrade to our digital archive system. We released a tender to the market last year and are now in the final stages of evaluating vendor submissions. So at this stage, we're not really in a position to discuss this in any more details, except that we are very excited, as you can imagine. We're expecting the project to deliver a solution which will replace the multiple databases that we currently operate with, including the blue screen technology that you saw in the news library clip. Our department is currently operating with multiple systems, many of which were implemented for a single purpose in independently operating business areas prior to the Content Services Department bringing these small libraries and information services into one department. This has meant that there may be the data for the same piece of content entered into several different systems, using different data structures, and often holding one or two pieces of information that are special only to that function or that one system. Again, I suspect that multiple systems holding duplicated data about the same object is not unique to the ABC. Different data in different systems reduces the integrity of that information and reduces the ability to use that data in consistent and smart ways throughout the organization. The digital capability for ABC Archives aims to establish a single digital repository for ABC Archive content coming from the various content areas: news, television, and radio. As part of designing the system, we'll be looking at the sources of incoming media assets and the associated data with a view to this being as automated as we can make it. We'll be reliant on data held in other systems in the ABC, which is why I thought we might look at this picture again, because it illustrates some of the many platforms for which content is created. Often there are different versions of a piece of content that have been edited for different platforms. What's a copy, what's the original, and what media assets are really individual items that need to be managed as such. For example, a program made for radio may have commercial music in it, which we can use under our music blanket agreements for broadcast radio, but which may need to be stripped out when we publish that content as a podcast. So we've now got two items that need to be managed. Both these are unique media assets which need to be separately identified and managed, but would benefit from being related to each other. Data about these content items is produced through the life cycle of that item. Given the move to digital production across news and television and radio and online, the nature of this work means that there are a very large number of people across the ABC who are creating or enhancing data as part of their role in the content production process. Not all, however, would see themselves as information managers, and this in itself can create a problem. Data can be entered using shortcuts, idiosyncratic spellings and titlings, all of which works quite adequately within the boundaries of a single work process or a single production unit, but not so well when that data needs to be used in another system or in within another function or activity in the organization. Again, I suspect that this is not unique to the broadcasting industry. It does cry out for better enterprise-wide information architecture, which would enable data to be entered once and used across the organization. An interesting statistic we came across was that the national broadcaster in Finland, following a broad audit across their organization, calculated that at least 1/3 of its 3,000 employees create data about their core business objects. If the same ratio is applied to the ABC's well over 4,000 staff, an organization doing very similar work, that would be about at least 1,400 staff, I suspect more, engaged in some way at some point in their day in this kind of data entry work. Not all, as I said, not all of them see themselves as information professionals, and really the question is, should they? Data management needs to underpin all of our activities in a digital workplace, but how do we go about doing that? So just highlighting that we could potentially be receiving content and data from each of those program platform areas, and they are all likely to use different data structures, different conventions, etc. So as I said, there's a lot of work ahead of us. So if we look at media industry data, many market players are in similar position, as disparate data is difficult to integrate across functions and quite costly to manage in terms of resources and information technology development. Cross-media initiatives, buying, planning, merger and acquisition activity, management of creative asset tagging all can create new data silos, each with unique nomenclature methods for managing records. Major strategic endeavors, such as a platform for multi-channel campaigns across the ABC, reporting as part of a business intelligence strategy, can be hampered or stalled if fundamental master data is not in place. You know, where is our master data? Where we've got duplicate data? How do you identify which is the actual source of truth? And is there one? So at a time when marketers, agencies, and the media most need to manage and understand their business on a holistic basis in order to grow, there is a lack of industry reference standards for data recording and management. Without the benefit of common master data, software solution developers have created business management systems with their own data management definitions, or definitions supplied to them to meet departmental business management criteria. A system, for example, may not have incorporated governance controls to reduce duplication of records based on inconstant naming conventions. As a result, the information and data output of these systems may render rich details, but cannot accurately summarize an activity. Just see if there's, yeah, we covered all that. So ABC data. Back in, we work with the National Archives of Australia as a Commonwealth agency, and back in 2004, we did the DIRCS survey across the organization. DIRCS stands for Designing Information and Record Keeping Systems, and one of the first steps in developing that is identifying, like doing an audit of your information systems and sources in the organization. So this was in 2004. We identified 1,500 databases in the ABC. We're currently doing another review at the moment for information systems holding ABC records. And I suspect that it probably hasn't really improved that much. It may have even developed. And 700 of those systems stored ABC records. So you can see that's a very challenging thing to manage. If we're responsible for managing the records, how do you do it when they're in 700 different systems? The infrastructure, staffing, data entry, oversight management of data in each system, system maintenance, training manuals, all that needs to be done. You can see that it's duplicated so many times with so many systems. Simple questions are difficult to answer. How many times has a tape been broadcast, for example? Well, the information sits maybe in the scheduling system. The tape ID sits in a library system. If we want to report broadcast content by genre, again, we need to look at different systems for that information, and then how reliable is it, particularly if they're not using a standard set of genre right across the ABC. We tend to use different genre sets for different purposes. So answers must be assembled manually using stitched together data, and as you know, that always takes time. So in working towards potential solutions, we've identified a great deal of redundancy in the number of databases and the work involved in creating, maintaining, and using them. Despite all this work on gathering and maintaining databases, the simple questions cannot easily be answered. So we've been talking about the current approach to technology projects. And again, I'm interested to find out if this is common in other organizations as well. So often what happens is a project might be system-based. So a system needs to be replaced. We will then sort of opt to take a local perspective on that, on what's required, rather than an organization-wide approach when the new system is required. Typically, a technology project will address a number of questions, but from an information management or information architecture perspective, not all of them are really the right ones. What users want in this part of the organization is that is actually paying for this system often preempts questions about interoperability with other systems and applicability of industry-wide rather than individual vendor standards. So you get systems isolating your information within that system. Of course, obviously with interoperability, a project will often look at the system that a particular system needs to send data to, but it might only look at the immediate requirements. It's not thinking about how might we want to use that data in a year's time or 3 years' time. If the shape of the ABC changes, what does that mean for that data? And it's really, we really have to start moving to the information and the data is the first set of requirements. How best do we structure that? And then the technology requirements fall around that. So, typically, capabilities required for information management in broadcasting were developed independently by project, application, or information type. This approach has led to fragmented, disjointed silos of information that are not easily joined together and cannot readily support new information types and use cases. It also has generated siloed approaches to managing information, each application or project taking its own approaches. This creates redundancies and therefore higher costs, inconsistencies, higher risk and higher cost, complexity and lack of agility. Lack of transparency, it's impossible to know how the data is really being managed. To meet the new information challenges described in this slide here, a new approach is required, the Information Capabilities Framework. In order to change this situation, there are a number of important steps to take towards integrated systems. Firstly, focus on information as a component of the media itself. So this is in the broadcasting context. The need for information data first focus rather than technology first focus. Identifying the information as an asset, for example. The application of relevant industry standards within a common data model and associated vocabularies is a significant starting point, and one where content services has been playing a significant role within the ABC. Okay, so why does this matter? The consequence of these difficulties are not always easily recognized in an organization. As a result of poor information management, we will see a lot of wasted energy trying to overcome the symptoms rather than the underlying cause. Sometimes it's relatively easy to identify the problem and even to come up with potential solutions. The much harder part is to explain the problems and solutions to managers who have their own ideas about how to tackle information management, often which involves a new system or more technology. This is particularly difficult in large organizations where silos of information and silos of budgets make it difficult to understand the organization-wide approach that's needed. So I thought that the square on the top right-hand side, manual effort is often used to compensate for record-keeping misalignments and gaps instead of implementing a system-based solution. Because we know the quirks and failings of our systems, we know how to work around it. So we're often using people's time to solve those problems rather than getting the data right in the systems that would allow those same people to actually generate a report to give them the information, the data that they need to do the work that's required. So, improving performance. So we'll just talk about these three things: datification, master data, and metadata. So the first step towards improving our asset information is datification, value adding to the information that you probably already have to make it usable in new and innovative ways. For example, if you have recipes on your website, you can add an ingredients list, nutritional details, perishability, data about availability, and so on to enhance the user experience of using the content. Another way of thinking of datification is turning free text into machine actionable data. So we've got an example here related to our rights information. Now, rights information is absolutely critical to using media in our collections. We did some work with the EBU, which is the European Broadcasting Union, and a couple of my staff were involved in exploring this topic and looking at an appropriate rights model for broadcasters, and actually wrote up some of the material in this report. So the rapidly evolving digital media marketplace has created rights-related information management challenges. Media contracts have become increasingly more complex as rights are split into smaller and smaller packages to keep pace with new technologies and rapidly evolving distribution channels. To get an idea of how this digital evolution has occurred, 10 years ago, only 1/3 of Australian households had digital television, and the ABC had just launched ABC2. In 2007, Australia's first catch-up television service, iView, was still a thing of the future. Finally, for viewers, the distribution channels were dominated by the free-to-air broadcasters, 7, 9, 10, the ABC and SBS, and Foxtel, the main player in the subscription market. Now, the ABC has 4 digital channels, and in December launched its first HD services for ABC and ABC News 24. iView attracts around 50 million plays per month and accounts for approximately half of the total time streamed by Australian TV video services. Low management costs associated with the internet have exponentially increased the number of operators streaming television programs and movies to audiences online, with the ABC facing competition from the likes of QuickFlix, Foxtel Play, Netflix, and Stan. For old contracts and archive content, uncertainty about rights related to the new technologies and distribution channels imply that the content cannot be exploited easily, making it inaccessible to audience and users without manual and costly legal intervention. However, applying information management principles to standardize the tagging and sharing of rights information using standards such as MCO, which is the model that we were talking about. Whoops, caught out, I can't remember what it stands for, MCO. It'll come to me in a minute. But it's a rights model. It's an ontology. And that could improve the efficiency and rapidly reduce costs associated with making ABC's archive content available to audiences using new technologies and platforms. At the moment, our rights team need to delve into the collection of documentation that we have about each program. They have to read through the text on those, whether they're scanned or still pieces of paper. We are scanning them. But scanning them is still not really datification. You've really just got a picture of the text on that page. You haven't actually turned it into a database, which has that powerful ability to answer questions and churn out data relevant to what you need to do. So it's a vital area of information management for us. We cannot risk reusing content for which we do not have the appropriate permissions. Currently, the rights management team retrieve and assess contracts to determine availability of rights on a specific piece of content. Clearly, it would be a tremendous saving if this information could be attached to the resource in machine actionable format that didn't require a specialist to analyze it, especially as we want to reuse our content in ever-increasing number of ways and on different kinds of devices. It is quite challenging, and when we've discussed this before, we're always going to need people who can translate and interpret what the agreements actually are and what the potential for the ABC is in actually using that content. And because things change and expectations change, we can often apply interpretations that allow us to use content even though perhaps that particular technology was not thought of at the time that program was made. Here's the answer to my question. The media contract ontology, MCO, is, to put it simply, a machine-readable contract language with a focus on intellectual property rights. This provides a vocabulary for describing a class of rights. So don't get too excited, we're not there yet. We haven't implemented that. This next slide, I thought it's interesting because it actually demonstrates the different information that's held in different systems. So we've got our scheduling system, we have our rights inventory system, we have our tape library system, we've got an archive scheduling system, so the data that was in the previous system sits in one of our systems here, TVBDA, and then information coming off the music cue sheet for a particular program. So we looked at this one program, My Place, Series 2, Episode 1. It's definitely one piece of content. And what did we find? With the episode of Series 2, there's no common data across all of these data sets. The most relevant information is found on the music cue sheet, which was created for music reporting bodies, rather than data that was created for ABC use. But it is actually the most comprehensive information on that last square there. All this means work for anyone trying to reconcile this data. No chance of concatenating the data. Each piece would need to be checked before an authoritative master data set could be agreed upon. And there could be up to 20 other systems across the ABC that replicate data about this core ABC-commissioned business object in some form. In commercial, the asset repository rights management system. In content services, we have our digital mass system. We've got our tape library system, Trace. We've got a database of videos that we consign to, of information for the videos that we consign to the National Archive. There's web content management systems in various libraries. There's documentation related to the program in our records management system, which is RM8. There's legal information in their system. There's document contracts, document collection. So there's quite a bit of this information that's around. So if we went through and analyzed that, you would see that even with a program number, the program number is not represented in exactly the same way in every system. Human beings can look at it and go, oh yeah, I know what that means. I know that in this system we do X, Y, Z, we don't put in the zeros or we don't do something, and they can interpret it. But if you want a computer to interpret it, you're going to have to do a lot of explaining. So you can see each, the year of reference is 2010 in 3 of the systems. Doesn't exist in another one, and is 2011 in another one. So who knows if they're talking about a different version of that item. Language, ABC TV classification. Okay, so in one system we called it G, and in another system we called it, oh no, 2 of them are G, sorry, I can't read. Different types. Oh, there's another genre for children's, and over on the first slide, we've got several genres applied. So you can see that, these are the ABC's core business objects. These are the media assets that we can use for engaging with audiences. Very difficult for us to actually draw that data from across the organization. We are very good at the ABC at working around all these things, so you probably won't suffer for a while. Oops, there we go. So metadata. Metadata is another aspect of information management with which information professionals such as you in this room will be very familiar. Standard vocabulary is our common feature of our work. This particular example here is from IPTC, which is a news standard. Since the late 1970s, IPTC's activities have primarily focused on developing and publishing industry standards for the exchange of news data of all common media types, and their media topic news codes are at the source of terms that describe news content. This forms the basis of the ABC subject headings used to flag online content on our websites. Content services staff have been actively involved in working with the digital network team in implementing these vocabularies. Got my eye on the time. Skills, so let's talk about information specialists. Skills and attributes of information specialists. The Australian Library and Information Association, ALIA, the Australian Society of Archivists, and the Records and Information Management Professionals Australia collaborated on the development of the foundation knowledge, skills, and attributes for information professionals working in archives, libraries, and records management. The policy was adopted in 2014 and 2015. So when I use the term information professionals, I'm specifically referring to these particular groups. Among the many skills outlined in the list, 2 in particular seem to reflect the points we've looked at about the importance of master data management and metadata management. We have long experience of these in the respective traditions of archives, libraries, and records management, all of which are disciplines that are well represented in our department. The modern information professional can have an important role in meeting the information challenges of a broadcaster and similar organizations, despite the difficulties that I've been outlining here. However, these days, you can't do anything alone. We all have to collaborate. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, information management in the ABC is a widespread activity and involves a number of other skills and attributes. As information professionals, we are one part of the team and need to work in close harmony with many others who come from different backgrounds. Communication across different understandings of information management certainly brings about some interesting challenges. For some people, information architecture is really web design. It's not enterprise-wide information architecture. So we need to spell out what we're talking about. With the technology, the IT teams, information architecture is usually something associated with a single So enterprise architecture, so current areas of practice in information architecture. So looking at enterprise architecture, in 2011, the ABC ICT strategy established an ABC-wide ICT enterprise architecture, which has been fantastic. Since its establishment, there has necessarily been a focus on the development and implementation of the technical and application architecture layers of an ABC enterprise architecture. During this period, some partial or divisional level enterprise information architecture solutions have been developed and selectively implemented in both television, for example, part of the enterprise service bus solution, and radio, for example, as part of their radio API, so that's used for the radio apps. With the launch of the strategy for information and media management, which I'll talk about in a minute, and the recent establishment of, or the proposed establishment of an architecture review board, there's now the necessary level of organizational recognition to establish models, strategy, governance, and infrastructure of an information architecture layer of the ABC EA information architecture. So with the ICT strategy, my little theme is let's get the information in there. It's not just the technology. ICT stands for Information Communication Technology, and I think we often just head to the technology side of it. File-based delivery standards. Broadcasters and post-production houses have been moving over to file-based operations in recent years. As part of this, there's been a shift towards the automated quality control, including checks for loudness and audio channel configuration and video quality. This development requires that the ABC adopt specific information protocols to replace the manual processes and subjective quality standards that existed in the past. Website and digital services, there's obviously great scope for information professionals working with these teams, to improve access for audience and users of the systems. Business requirements and business process models have become synonymous with the design and development of individual technology projects. We're responsible, one of our technology areas responsible for overseeing the information architecture on individual technology projects. And of course, there's always the risk that the broader requirements and the broader considerations of the organization might not be recognized in the way that project is delivered. At the Future of Work conference, which was held in Melbourne earlier this year, it was pointed out that the Australian Workforce and Productivity Agency noted that ICT skills and capabilities are important for all workers, not just those engaged in specialist ICT roles. So where I had mentioned that we've got people doing data work throughout the organization, it's important to remember that we need to keep that in mind because, is there special guidance or training they need? But largely, I do ask that question, do they need to worry about those things, or should the systems be set up so that they're automatically entering data in the way that it's needed? So in 2015, I think we set up a strategy for information and media management within the ABC. This came from a couple of impetuses. Our chief operating officer wanted us to review what media was stored where and why so that we had a complete picture across the organization. Our web developers were very aware of the manipulation and re-entry of data that they had to do to produce what they needed for the web when data was coming from television and radio. And of course, working with the National Archives Digital Continuity 2020 strategy, we needed to have an executive committee in place. So this committee was set up and it gives us the opportunity for a strategy for moving forward. So, conclusions. At the ABC, we're very much in a transitional state with a great deal of work on media information management remaining to be done. But with the information and data professionals involved in the process and bringing to the process our particular skills, we should be able to move from the old way of doing things to the new ways. So there's some examples there, moving from single-purpose systems to common data models, putting the emphasis on the information and the data rather than the technology. Decision-making principles. In making the transition, we need to adhere to a clear set of principles across the organization. Media assets and associated assets are core ABC assets for what we do. It's interesting, in the early days of film, and we really value some of that content that's on our film, but the attitude there was you played the thing to air, and then you got on with the next program. And that piece of film was just thrown into a corner. And then, of course, there was that period where tape was introduced, and they recorded over tape because tape was very valuable. Film you couldn't reuse, so it just got thrown into a corner. Tape you could use, so you could save money. So we have a great film collection, but we're missing some of that early tape material because of the reuse. Collaboration and cooperation, obviously, very important, and whole of organization approach. So the expected outcomes, if we are to get our way, would be media assets, unique identifiers assigned, search results precise and relevant, all media assets uniquely identified, clearly linked to rights, permissions available, reduced need for storage, savings in staff time, improved information for decision making, which is becoming more and more important for organizations, business intelligence, and industry standards applied to data models, genres, content vocabularies. These outcomes would support the ABC in delivering on its audience-centered mission and its quality, content, and efficiency objectives. So in summary, better organization-wide information architecture with a focus on well-managed master data and metadata will achieve greater return on technology, product, and operational investment. It will enable reliable data for business intelligence to support key decisions. It really is all about getting smarter with our data. It's a work in progress. Well, it's a collaborative work in process. So thank you.